Discuss the political and humanitarian crisis in Syria is journalist Afshin Rattansi from London, Bassam Abdullah, a director of the Center for Strategic Studies at Damascus University in Syria. And on set with me is Paul Salem from the Middle East Institute right here in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for joining us. Paul, let me start with you. We just heard from our correspondent. Syria has lost an air base in the north of the country. 2 other military bases have been lost. The correspondent telling us that 2 other provinces face threats from Islamic State. As we hear that, what do you think is going through the minds of Pentagon military planners, diplomats, the White House here in Washington?
Well, certainly the threat from ISIS has, started from Syria. It impacted Iraq in a major way, and now it's coming back to impact Syria as well. The U.S. has just recently become re-engaged in Iraq. President Obama, only a few weeks ago, committing air power to defend Kurdish and Baghdad bases and embassies and so on. And a lot of the military officials in Washington indicating that engaging in Iraq only will not be enough because ISIS has a strong power base in Syria. This power base is not shrinking, it's expanding. More worrisome, if they are pushed out of Iraq, they might relocate even more to Syria and take over more areas and more territory. They've caused a lot of damage in Syria as they have in Iraq. The U.S. has indicated that it will start, drone flights and other forms of surveillance over Syria, probably looking for targets relating to ISIS. President Obama was on vacation last week, is now back in Washington, D.C., so I imagine this week there will be a lot of discussion about what the Syria strategy will be. Will it involve airstrikes? Will it involve any coordination with the Syrian government? Will it involve more support for the non-radical Syrian opposition, which the U.S. has already some levels of support for? So the main elements of a Syria strategy certainly not yet clear in Washington.
Right, but Afshin, it does look like the main elements of an escalation of U.S. involvement in Syria is now going to be happening. As Paul just said, we've got surveillance flights now taking place over Syria. If the U.S. starts bombing IS targets inside Syria, what kind of impact is that going to have?
Well, it won't be the impact that most people on planet Earth want those airstrikes to achieve. It's notable, of course, that in your first question, actually, what does the United States, how does it retaliate, as it were, to these horrific news that parts of Syria are being captured by these rebels? I mean, the facetious answer, if one ignores the 200,000 dead in the Syrian conflict for a moment, is that the Americans continue to support ISIS, because that's what they've been doing all across this region. And the idea that the United States has to respond to ISIS when the United States, I'm not being too simplistic. They were the people supporting ISIS. David Cameron here in London supported the bombing of Libya, which is where ISIS is now controlling or destroying Tripoli airport. The best thing President Obama could do, presumably, on this crisis, this very serious crisis, is to continue his vacation.
Dr. Abdullah, the United States seems to be switching sides right now. As Afshin Rattansi just pointed out, they once supported ISIS. They supported forces who were trying to topple the government of Bashar al-Assad. Now there is possibly an alliance that's going to be formed with Assad to take on ISIS. What's the view from Damascus?
First of all, it's not a government of Bashar al-Assad, it's a Syrian government. I should correct that. Secondly, yesterday, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Walid Mualem, he expressed that Damascus is ready to coordinate and cooperate in combating terrorism under the umbrella of Resolution 2170. This is an important thing, because to fight against ISIS, it's difficult not only for America, for other regional countries. What Damascus is asking from the international community is to stop the ideological support, financing support, logistic support. To tell you the truth, these states who are supporting the ISIS, it's Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. So to starting a real combating the ISIS or other terroristic group, we should start from Turkey, Qatar, and this address is well known. But the same states who supported ISIS, they cannot be states who can fight against terrorism. I think the Syrian government is ready, but we are waiting to see what is the reaction from Washington. Still, as understood, President Obama still He didn't decide. Martin Dempsey, General Martin Dempsey, he said that there are different options, but the main thing is that Washington should talk to Damascus, should coordinate with Damascus. Without that, it will be Damascus looking for that as aggression. And I think the resolution 2170 mentioned that this resolution respecting the independence and the integrity of territory of Syria and Iraq. This is the main important thing from Damascus.
Right, Paul, I'm going to get back to something you said earlier on, and that is the U.S. response to what is happening in Syria and northwestern Iraq. It seems the United States only woke up to the threat that IS poses after the brutal death of journalist James Foley.
No, the U.S. Indeed was not properly following the situation in Syria and Iraq. There were some within the intelligence community of the U.S. and others who warned that ISIS was much stronger than it initially appeared, and that what happened in Iraq should not have been a surprise. Be that as it may, the Obama administration reacted a few weeks ago when, after ISIS had taken over the city of Mosul and most of the sort of the Sunni areas of western and northern Iraq, and was doing two things: threatening to move forward towards Erbil, and the relationship between Washington, Turkey, and others in Erbil is very strong. So that was a sort of a red trigger moment. Also, there was in the media in the US and internationally, and the White House gets very impacted by this media, the case of the group of Yazidis that was in a particular humanitarian situation. And I had met with people from the White House that very day, and they were very under pressure from US media and so on about that humanitarian crisis. And many people criticized them that, you know, things similar happened in Syria, you didn't act, why did you act in the case of Iraq? In any case, those two conditions forced politically the White House to take the steps that President Obama mentioned a few weeks ago. The killing of James Foley came after this decision.
Okay.
It actually probably gives President Obama now more political leeway to expand the air war into Syria, because James Foley, of course, was killed by ISIS in Syria, not in Iraq. So, but that was the second step, in effect.
Okay. Afshin, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, President Obama, David Cameron here, they don't care about these people being killed. They didn't care about the Christians being murdered by rebels in Syria. I mean, the British government, as far as we know, who knows, special forces, was supporting the people killing in the massacres in Syria. So the idea that the White House is this organization that is pressured by the media because of the Yazidis, or that they're getting intelligence about ISIS taking over Mosul and this is all utter nonsense.
No, it's not. The White House
the United States is an ally of Saudi Arabia, it's an ally of Israel, and it's complete absurdity.
I'll give you a chance.
I mean, that shows such an intellectual vacancy in Washington. If they really are just responding to these events, while at the same time holding Israel and Saudi Arabia that close to them, who are the very people that are involved in all of this. We saw Israeli politicians, you know, across the Golan Heights. Netanyahu was treating ISIS soldiers, wasn't he, in Golan? Not that long ago. No, this public facade of the Obama administration has to be disposed of. And certainly will be when history comes to be written about these brutal consequences of NATO powers trying to deliberately destroy the Middle East from any outsider's point of view.
Okay.
Because we've been studying this. When you look at the intricacies, it may look like that. But to any outsider, it must look like they are deliberately supporting ISIS. They're deliberately supporting anything to destroy secular stability, any kind of stability, whilst all at the same time trying to hit at Iran.
Okay. Paul, you want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, with due respect, I disagree with most of what my colleague is saying. I mean, first of all, it's not a surprise that Obama is a politician. He's not a strategist. He does react sometimes to public opinion when it's strong because he's a politician. He thinks about his political legacy.
I'm even talking about.
Let me continue.
Okay.
And to say with certainty that, you know, the U.S. has, I mean, I'm no defender of the U.S. I'm from Beirut myself, and I'm from the Middle East. But to say, it's just inaccurate to say that the U.S. has planned all these massacres and so on and so forth. That's simply not accurate, and it doesn't necessarily.
Well, they trained the people to carry them out.
Okay, Dr. Abdullah, let me go to you. If the United States, which is now carrying out surveillance flights over Syria, carries out bombing attacks, airstrikes on Syria, will that not be a violation of Syrian sovereignty, and what will Syria do about that?
Still, I mentioned that the Minister of Foreign Affairs yesterday mentioned that we will consider that as aggression. America can use a lot of its instruments on from the air forces, but as the minister said, the coordination is absolutely, the Russian repeated the same phrases and the same words, Mr. Lavrov. And I think the question here that if America is seriously want to combat ISIS, this is the first question. The second question, if America is seriously want to combat combating ISIS, we should see that there is a pressure on Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Without that, how we can combating terrorism or ISIS while the border between Syria and Turkey is open, and the government of now Davutoğlu, I think, not the government of Erdogan and Davutoğlu, is still supporting ISIS openly. It's not a question of a secret way. So,
okay, we will look at the involvement.
And there is a real approach.
Afshin, I'll come to you in a moment. We will look at other countries' involvement in this crisis as well. But right now, it's time for a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion about what the future holds for Syria amid the civil war there. You're watching The Heat.